Hi, I'm Ian Everdell, and I'm a user experience consultant. When we look at the parts of a website that attract our eyes and why, typically we actually look at a website in almost sort of three phases. The first one is a very quick scan to sort of orient ourselves. And that's usually we're looking at a logo, the navigation, where the content is on the page, just to get an idea of where we might find things. Then we go through a sort of secondary scan where we're starting to identify what we call information scent. So when we go to a website, we have all these words and ideas in our brains that are related to what we're looking for, and those ideas and concepts almost jumped off the page at us. And that second scan helps us start to identify where those are. And typically that happens in headings, subheadings, section headings, the beginnings of paragraphs, lists, image captions, things like that. And then we have a third scan, which is where we start to get into more actual reading of the content. And there's a really important point there in that we don't actually read unless we find something that's interesting to us and relevant to what we're looking for. So we're scanning through the content looking for, again, that information scent. So it's really important that as you're designing your content and going through copywriting, you need to make sure that those information-rich words are contained within the first 2 or 3 words of those headings, subheadings, each paragraph, because that's what's going to capture our attention and convince us to read. There are also other things that capture our visual attention as well. Images certainly can. Faces, we're very driven by direction, so you can use things like people looking in a particular direction, pointing, arrows. The design does also dictate how our eyes move through the page. Does what we look at differ depending on whether we're on a desktop, tablet, or mobile device? Yes and no. Certainly there are components of that information scent that we're looking for regardless of what device we're on. So again, it's important to make sure that you're using information-rich words, that those are front-loaded within the content. So again, at the beginning of those headings and sentences and stuff. Certainly on a mobile device, you're much more constrained by the size of the screen, and we tend to actually scan a little bit more vertically there. It's very easy to move the screen past our eyes. So you see very robust sort of up and down scanning patterns there. So keeping things to the left side of the screen to capture attention, and then engaging the viewer to actually read or look at a piece of content. Other than that, realistically, we don't really look at different things depending on the device that we're using. 3 essential elements that marketers need to build into their sites when trying to design a really good user experience are content, architecture, and then interactivity in the forms of data input. And that sounds like cheating because those are basically the things that you need to have to build any site. And the problem with not thinking about them in terms of the user experience is that you're creating an experience whether you're thinking about it or not. So you really do need to think about it. When we look at content, you've probably heard that content is king. And that's definitely true. We go to a site to look for content. So you need to make sure that it's easy to read, that it's designed for easy consumption, that it's written for easy consumption. And that comes down to the way it's presented on the page, the way it's written, making sure that it's front-loaded, again, to include those information-rich words that are going to capture a visitor's attention and keep them engaged. When we look at the architecture, it's really important to understand what language people are using to navigate through your content, that the structure makes sense to them. And the only way to understand both what you need to write in terms of visitor-focused content and also how to design a visitor-focused architecture is to talk to people. You need to go out and talk to your customers or your potential customers to understand what language they're using, what they're looking for, and how you can support them finding that on your website. The third piece was data input. Chances are you've got a form of some sort somewhere on your site, and you need to make sure that's user-friendly as well. It's very easy to just include the default form fields and buttons that are included in a browser, but it's also very easy to make them user-friendly using HTML5 keyboard types so that when somebody's using a mobile phone and taps in an email field, it brings up an email keyboard instead of the standard text keyboard. Making sure that your error messages are easy to understand and easy to fix, using a call to action that's more than just submit. So there are lots of ways that you can make a form much more easy and enjoyable to interact with than just using the default browser capabilities. When creating a mobile site, the things that a marketer will pay attention to differ a little bit depending on the approach they're taking to that mobile design. If you're designing a strictly mobile site that isn't responsive, that is only going to be seen on a mobile device, chances are you're thinking about reprioritizing the content, potentially changing the architecture, taking content out. And in that case, again, you need to really understand what people are trying to do on your site on a phone, because that's going to help you understand, how you need to prioritize that content. So you may change what you see on the homepage. You may include nice big, calls to action for particular, what we would call desire paths. So that's if you've ever come to a corner and instead of following the sidewalk, you cut across someone's lawn, that's a desire path. It's a way to get from point A to point B faster. And often on mobile sites, you'll see that those desire paths have been prioritized, where you don't necessarily have to make 3 or 4 clicks to get something. They've been put on the home page and you can make 1 click to get to that particular task. Now, if you're designing responsively, really you need to think about mobile first. If you can fit your content and functionality onto the screen of a mobile phone, then you can think about progressively enhancing and scaling that up to a larger screen size. By thinking mobile first, that really forces you to really consider, what content, what multimedia, what elements of your site really need to be there because you're constrained by the screen size. And then as you get to those bigger screens, you can think about adding some of those richer elements in.